Joining us now, Republican Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming. He's part of the Republican Senate leadership. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. Hillary Clinton, the Democratic presidential candidate, former colleague of yours in the Senate, she just issued this statement. This Senate has almost a full year to consider and confirm Judge Garland. It should begin that work immediately by giving Judge Garland a full and fair hearing followed by a vote. That is what the American people deserve. It is what our Constitution demands. And with millions of people's lives in the balance, anything less is entirely unacceptable. Are you at least willing to welcome him into your office, to sit down with him, to talk with him, to consider the possibility of hearings? Forget about a vote for now.
Well, I don't know that that actually does anything that's fair to him. This has already been decided. This next Supreme Court nominee ought to come from the next president. This is not about the person. It's about the principle involved, and I want to give the American people a voice in this. So it's interesting when Ms. Clinton makes this statement, both Justice Alito and Justice Breyer have said that they can do their work with 8 members. There's nothing about the magic number of 9.
But it would be almost a year until there's a full 9 members of the United States Supreme Court. Is that what the American people deserve, to have 8 to consider some of the most sensitive, important issues with 8 justices as opposed to 9?
Well, we've had both 2 of the justices, one Republican appointed, one Democrat appointed. They said they can do their work. And in our lifetime alone, when Abe Fortas resigned from the Supreme Court, that was open for well over a year. So this is not at all unusual. There's nothing about this. And I think it's just most important in a presidential election, when the president's time is running very short, that we ought to just give the American people a choice.
Well, what do you think of Judge Merrick Garland, based on what you know, his qualifications, his reputation? Forget about the fact that this is an election year. Let's say it wasn't an election year. You think he would be good for the United States Supreme Court?
Well, to me, again, it's not about the person. It's about the principle that we're looking at. So qualifications here, in his case, don't really matter at all to me when this higher principle is involved, not the person that's been nominated.
Because let's say the president decides, let's say that a Democrat is elected president of the United States in November. Let's say Hillary Clinton is elected president, and this nomination came forward. Would you then consider it after a Democrat is elected president?
Well, if the Democrat's elected, then that person's going to have an opportunity to make the case.
Well, the president's still president until January 20th of next year. Let's say the president pushes the U.S. Senate to do it between November and January 20th. It should
be the next president who makes that decision, who makes that nomination. That, to me, is what this upcoming election is about. This is a very consequential election for the country, and that's the way we ought to deal with this. Now, I've heard the president today talk about the Constitution. I have the Constitution right here. Your legal scholars will tell you that what the president is saying is just a politically convenient fairy tale. There is nothing here in the Constitution that says the Senate needs to vote. There have been 124 Supreme Court members so far, but there have been 160 nominees, and a dozen of them have never even had a vote. So this is not at all unusual, and we know that the members of the current Supreme Court say they can do fine with 8.
Back in 1997, Orrin Hatch, a friend of yours, you know him well, a senior member of the Judiciary Committee, he said this about Merrick Garland. Listen to this.
Based solely on his qualifications, I support the nomination of Mr. Garland, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. To my knowledge, no one, absolutely no one, disputes the following. Merrick Garland is highly qualified to sit on the D.C. Circuit. His intelligence and his scholarship cannot be questioned.
Now, today, Senator Hatch issued another statement saying, I think highly of Judge Garland, but his nomination doesn't in any way change current circumstances. I remain convinced that the best way for the Senate to do its job is to conduct the confirmation process after this toxic presidential election season is over. You know, when there was a Republican president who wanted to nominate justices during an election year, Republicans at that point said to the Democratic majority in the Senate, give them a chance, let there be a full hearing, up or down vote. Is it all just politics about the Supreme Court? Because shouldn't the Supreme Court be at a higher level?
Well, the Supreme Court is a lifetime appointment. Justice Scalia served for 30 years. So these are so consequential in terms of the future of the country, the direction of the country, the things that come in front of the president. We've had the president reelected in 2012, and then the Republicans picked up 9 Senate seats in 2014. taking over the majority. So clearly, when you take a look at those two things, that's the reason you really ought to say, let's wait till after this election decides, and that person should make the nomination. And we ought to be spending this year on things we actually agree on, working in a bipartisan way. You know, Debbie Wasserman Schultz just made some comments about obstruction. We just on Monday confirmed the president's new Secretary of Education in a bipartisan vote. We passed a major opioid bill, bipartisan. We ought to be working on things that we can work on and get done in terms of jobs, the economy, national security. Those are things that I think the American people worry about.
Judge Garland, you're not going to consider it at all. No hearings, nothing basically this year. You're going to wait till after the election.
That's already been decided. We need to focus on working together in a bipartisan way on things the American people are very concerned about right now.
Senator Barrasso is a member of the Senate Republican leadership. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Wolf.